Good evening. Welcome to tonight's shiur, Thursday evening of Parshas Behar-Bechukosai, and this coming Shabbos is Chazak on top of it. So let's go into our shiur. We might finish a little early. Ma'ariv up the road is at 9:30, so if I get 10 minutes to get up the road, that will be helpful for me. And so we'll see how we go. So the first question we have here, one of our listeners asks me the following. He, let's say, has a dietary problem with sugar, and therefore, when he has a cream cake, unfortunately, he has to remove the layer of cream. So now his question about Shabbos. Can you remove the layer of cream and throw it away? So on Shabbos, there is a concept of boirer, of selecting bad from good. Is not okay. Good from bad is also sometimes, but bad from good is definitely a problem. And in this case, it's not objectively bad, it's actually very tasty, but subjectively, for the person who's got a problem with excess sugar, so the cream is not okay. So it's subjectively psoilus, and that's an issue. Now, fortunately, I found this question directly addressed by Rabbi Seal Forkash in the Sefer Shabbos Halocho, and in volume 2. Now let's go to the more well-known story of first of all, cream floating on top of milk or fat floating on top of soup. So those of us who remember that the milk bottles being delivered to your doorstep, and the top inch and a half was cream, and beneath that was milk. And if you wanted, you stirred it, you shook up the bottle, and you had the milk mixed in. But if you wanted to have cream with your coffee, so you'd separate the cream from the top. And if you had a problem with too much fat in your diet, so you'd have to skim off that bit of cream. So in Shulchan Aruch, it talks about such a scenario where you want to remove the fat floating on the top of the milk or on the top of a soup, a chicken soup, obviously not together. Yeah? So now, so it says like this: to remove all the cream from the milk, that's not okay, because you're separating from two species, one from the other. What you can do, so you've got, let's say, an inch and a half of of cream, and the rest is milk. So don't remove an inch and a half, remove an inch, and there'll be a bit of cream left with the milk. In this way, you've taken, should we say, psoilus away from psoilus. You've taken the unwanted, part of the unwanted from the unwanted. That's okay. That's okay. But to take away all the cream from the milk, that's not okay. I'm not how practical it is, but let's say, in theory, to remove and to leave no cream at all, that would be a problem of boirer psoilus min ha'oichel. Could be also oichel min ha'psoilus, but let's leave it simple. So what Rav Forkash writes here, you have a problem with the cream on top of the cream cake. So take a knife and cut off 90% of the cream, and you'll leave a little thin layer of cream together with a cake. In this way, you've taken psoilus away from psoilus. Now, what happens if your sensitivity to cream is so acute that you have to remove all the cream? Then he says, if that's not, so therefore this first solution is not adequate. Okay, so then he says, let's take off all the cream and a thin slice of the cake. In this way, you've taken psoilus and oichel away from oichel. Not very happy about that, and the reason is, now let's come back to the fly in the soup. Now, In the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Shi in your Taz, he quotes the Taz that in the case that a fly fell into the soup, so then you can scoop up the fly together with some soup. So you've taken the psoiles and some oichel, and you've discarded them. So you're not just taking psoiles away from oichel, you're taking also food away from food together with the fly. The Alter Rebbe in the Siddur dismisses this solution, and the understanding of this is that since you're taking the fly and that spoon of soup and you're throwing them all away, so then what are you telling me that the spoon of soup is eichel? You're throwing it away. So in your mind, the fact that you're discarding it means it's by you it's psoiles. So they're taking the fly with the soup and throwing it all away is taking psoiles away from eichel. In that case, the same story here. To take away the cream with a thin layer of cake and discarding it is the same as taking the fly together with some soup because you're going to throw them all out in any case. So it's psoiles min ha'eichel. So that's where we have a problem. What does the Alter Rebbe actually advise? He comes up with an interesting chiddush, and that is where he says, instead of scooping the fly out of the soup with some soup, tilt the bowl, and the fly, you can blow it even, and then it will go overboard. Then you'll tilt the bowl back. In this way, I understand what he's saying is you're taking the soup away from the fly. If you're allowed to take the good away from the bad, you are allowed to. So that's the Alter Rebbe's solution, to tilt the bowl, and then once the fly has gone overboard, to tilt it back. All right, so that's what we have here so far. Rav Farkash is saying better to leave a little bit of the cream. That would be psoiles away from psoiles, but to take away all the cream plus a bit of oichel, that could be a problem. Okay, I'm looking here at the couple of questions on the chat. Why can I take chicken skin away? The cream is edible. I thought from good from good is okay. Yeah. So you are allowed to peel a banana on Shabbos. Are you taking the peel away from the banana? That's because that's called derech achila. You can only get to the food with taking away the peel. That's permitted. So if you've got chicken by the way, the skin is very gishmak, yeah. It's just that it could be for your diet, it's not good. But you can't get to the chicken without removing the skin. So it's like peeling. That's called derech achila. That's okay. But when that peeling doesn't answer the question, then we have a problem of taking what subjectively is psoiles. Taking away. Now you said good from good is okay. That's true only if it's for immediate use. But let's say to separate good from good for delayed use would be an issue of boirer. So let's say an example. You have a Friday night, you had a platter of meat and you had some cold cuts of salt beef and you had some turkey slices and you had some salami. Then you had a nice spread. And Baruch Hashem, everyone's happy and everyone's eaten, and there's quite a bit left over. Now, the nature of these things is that if you leave them together, the salami has got a strong garlic taste and that. You don't want them to stay together. Therefore, you'd want to take all the salami, put them in one container, and all the salt beef in another container, and all the turkey in another container. That's not allowed. So again, you're allowed to separate good from good for immediate use. If you want to have here salami here and turkey here and serve it as separate platters, for immediate use, that's okay. But to sort it out, to leave it in storage, so to speak, even for an hour later, that wouldn't be okay. All right. The problem with the cream here is, why is I'm saying it's psoiles, because he's throwing it away. And I said it's subjectively for this person. So if he had an enikul right next to him who loves the cream, and he takes the cream from the cake and gives it to his enikul, while the mommy's not looking, then that's okay because it's going to be eaten. it's going to be enjoyed. But if he's going to throw it away, it's pseudus. Okay, let's move on. What's our next question? So here's the following scenario. There's a hospital, and they have security. When you come to the hospital, you want to go in, they ask you who you're visiting, and you have to show ID, a passport or something, identification. And once they're satisfied that you are not a terrorist, so then they give you a wristband. And on the wristband is your details, and then you can go in and out of the hospital. So long as you show the wristband, you're good. Question here is, over Shabbos, so someone is staying, as the Kehillah have provided very generously, achnosos orchim for relatives near the hospital. So, but to get from the hospital to the achnosos orchim and back, you have to go across the street. So are you allowed to wear this wristband on your wrist when you're going from across the street? Is that not called carrying? So this question has been already addressed years ago in the Sefer Shmiras Shabbos Halocho, and he says it's a problem because it's not a piece of jewelry and it's not a garment. Garments are worn either to keep you covered, patznias, or to keep you warm. Wristbands serve neither purpose. What you could say, what about a piece of jewelry? A piece of jewelry is an ornament to make the person look more attractive. Fine, but a wristband with an identity ID does not do that either. So it doesn't enhance the persona. So that's a problem. So what he writes is, the Shmiras Shabbos Chosson Rav Neuvet writes, if you could make this wristband as a kind of band to hold your sleeve. I haven't seen this in years. It used to be common. Gentlemen used to have special elasticated bands which they would hold up their sleeves. So if you would use this as somehow to hold your sleeve together, you'd unbutton the buttons of your sleeve, and instead you'd have this wristband keeping your sleeve in place. He says that's the heter which he gives, because then it's serving your dressing. Good, but otherwise he does have it as a prop. Now then, Rav Yitzchok Zilberstein in the Sefer Torah Hayaledes comes up with another heter, and he says, look in Igris Moshe, where he talks about wearing a watch on Shabbos. Now we've gone through this before, how in Chabad we don't accept the heter to wear a watch on Shabbos. According to one report, Mezeder was told by the Frierdiker Rebbe, Shabbos terminate on Yomtov darf minute. Another discussion, but Reb Moshe talks about a limud schus for those who do wear watches on Shabbos, and he says possibly it's considered levisha, considered wearing, since you wear it mamish on your skin. What's his proof? You have it says tabas yeshal achosim, a ring with a seal. So in Gemara, in the Mishnah, it says for a man, it's not over an avera if he's wearing such a ring on Shabbos. It's considered an ornament. He says, so Rabbi Moshe says like this. Of course, the signet ring is used for sealing, when you have to seal a document. And if the seal is broken, so he's not going to wear it because it's not serving its function. And yet, he's allowed to wear it on Shabbos. It's not considered carrying. Why? So he says, because it's more mamish on the body, therefore it's called levisha. And if so, the wristwatch, which is a watch worn directly on the wrist, is also called levisha. Now, I don't really accept his argument, although his comparison is nice. As I said, a garment, in my understanding, is either for warmth or for cover, for tznius. If it's neither, then doesn't really qualify as a garment. So what then? Why is the heter to wear the ring? It could be that in Chenami, it's true, a man would wear a signet ring to seal documents, but that would morph into Mr. Plastical Mensch. So then you go around with such a ring. If you don't have such a ring, you are looked down as as a butler and as a schlepper. I don't have a signet ring. So therefore, it kind of, from becoming a tool for sealing, it becomes a, a status symbol. And you can say the same thing with a watch. Yes, I accept that. You can say the watch is really just to keep the time. You can do that from a clock on the wall also. It's not a garment as such. But a gentleman who doesn't wear a watch is perhaps less today because we've got mobile phones, etc. But perhaps a man without a watch is considered an ishkin shleimus ha'odom. So therefore it adds to his persona. I want to bring another proof to this svara. There's a discussion in the Mishnah, Machlokes Tanoim, whether wearing a sword on your waist is considered a tachshit or not. And one of the Tanoim says, if it were a tachshit, when it says Mashiach comes, that people no longer have swords, therefore Zarai, it's not a tachshit. But let's come back. And let's say people would wear swords, even lost lobby, let's say, or the other Tana, so it would consider it a tachshit. But why are you wearing a sword? Of course, it's a weapon, in case you need a weapon, or you need to cut something. You have the sword by your waist. So then it's for a function. But the same svara, since it became so fashionable that a man would walk around with a knife at his waist, therefore it became a status. And without it, it's a halber mensch. All of this is very nice, but it doesn't work for the wristband, because the wristband doesn't make you more of a mensch or less of a mensch. It doesn't. It's not mashlim. It doesn't complement your profile in any way. And therefore, I don't see that heter. And so going back, it is a problem. And the one solution you have here is to use it as a to keep your sleeve closed. So I was talking about this in class with the girls, and one of the girls says, "What happens if I'm not wearing such a garment which needs?" So another girl said, "Well, make sure to wear for Shabbos. If you have this situation that you're going to have to be in a hospital and walk across the street with such a band, make sure to wear such a shirt, which will need to have some kind of band." Okay, let's move on. Now I'm just sharing you things which are shtickle chidushim, which I find informative and news to myself, and I felt that I want to share them. So here's the following story, that someone has a guest who came on Yomtov, and they brought let's say, a box of chocolates. But the host or hostess has a strong suspicion that they were bought on the day of Yomtov from a shop. There's a shop nearby which also you can buy kosher chocolate there. And so she's worried that it was bought on Yomtov, and therefore the guest would very much bring this nice chocolate after dinner, serving tea, which would be part of the shleimus would be to serve these fancy chocolates. Are you allowed to serve the chocolates which were likely bought on Yomtov from a shop? So I'd like to say that what I responded, if it were Shabbos, that would be a problem. Because if it was for sure, bought on Shabbos. Don't forget, it was never mind bought from a store on Shabbos. If it was brought through the street on Shabbos, so it was melacha of carrying. And it's a big city, it's just a Rabban Deiraisa, unless there's an Erev. So that would be a problem, because there's a concept called Maaseh Shabbos. Maaseh Shabbos means that midrabanon there is a knas, a penalty, that if something was created through a violation of Shabbos, you're not allowed to have benefit from it until the end of Shabbos. So therefore you have here this, if something was brought to you on Shabbos in violation of carrying in the street on Shabbos, then that would be a problem, Maaseh Shabbos. Now, however, here we have in Shulchan Aruch Siman Tov Kuf Aleph Nichas Yomtov. In this respect, Yomtov is more lenient than Shabbos, as you may know, that the penalty for a violation of Shabbos is chorus and skila. It's a very, very korban. Yomtov, it's a lav, so it'd be malchus. So it puts Yomtov on a lower level of severity. And possibly because of that, the halacha is here, if now we know that we're not meant to strike a match, create a fire, ignite a fire on Yomtov. It's also the Rabbana of Moilid. Interesting. Also, last is Yomtov Mnei Moilid. The Kivin Shahoyo Afsha last is Me'erev Yomtov, also last is Yomtov. Interesting combination of 2 points here. It's creating something new, and had it been possible to do before Yomtov, had it not been possible, then you would be allowed to be moiled. But since it's possible to avoid, okay, whatever, that's a side lobbyist. The main thing is, it says here that the knas for violation of Yom Tov, there's no knas for violation as Yom Tov, as there is a knas for violation of Shabbos HaChamura. So therefore, the concept of Maaseh Shabbos, that since something was, this benefit was brought to me through a violation of Shabbos, that would be Isra on Shabbos, but not on Yom Tov. In one of the Sforim I wrote about this. I'm sure it's a very common situation where in Shlichus have someone invited for Shabbos dinner, and they are within walking distance, not a question, in that respect, but they come in, they bring a gift, and then kind of becomes a conversation where the chocolates by when you serve them. So what I say is the following. On the one hand, there's a mitzvah of you have to tell people you have to keep Shabbos. To go and start telling them, they're not ready for it. They're not kalim, possibly in your judgment, that I can understand. When they say, Rebbitzin, well, how about serving those chocolates? And then you can say, I'm really sorry that I can't serve them, but because they were brought on Shabbos, we can't have them on Shabbos. You can say it in a quiet way, in a private way, and that they should understand that something which is brought on Shabbos, so it's a we have a mitzvah of telling them, and when it's brought up in such a way, one could say it in a sensitive way that we cannot use it on Shabbos because of it was brought in a forbidden way. Right, let's go on to the next question, and that is about a Chosson giving a ring to the Kalloh. Someone's asking about the previous point about the wristbands, garters for socks. Would also, yes, if it works. Nowadays, our socks are elasticated. The garters for socks are not usually so necessary, but yeah, if that can be done, yes. All right, let's come to our Chosson. And so I got this question, I think, from 2 people. But one was a girl who was meeting a young man, and he gave her a gift worth $50, and she's asking, at the moment, at the time, I didn't realize, but was it wrong for me to have accepted the gift? Okay, so truthfully, I did do a little bit of looking around, and I'm sure there are out there some books which give guidance of behavior out on when Chosson and Kalloh are meeting before the shidduch. But I don't have such a sefer, or at least I didn't find it. But meanwhile, this is from the sefer Nitya Gavriel on shidduchim. So he writes, there's a minhag to give a Kalloh, Chosson, to give a Kalloh a ring on the engagement. Then he says that a particular godel introduced that you shouldn't be giving an engagement ring because of the concern of kiddushin. And in the note, he brings for the minhag of giving an engagement ring, very interesting, that's why I'm sharing it to you, that it says in Parshas Tesava, Eis Shtei Hatavois, those 3 words is Rosh Tevis Isha, and there's a remez that a wife is given 2 rings. Cute. One for the engagement and one for the marriage. Cute. What was the reason why some Gedolim, including the Rebbe, phased or discouraged giving an engagement ring? Because the engagement is in a large measure very similar to the Erusin, which was done in times bygone, months before the wedding. So there's two phases in marriage in Halocho. There's the betrothal, the reservation that we are committed to one another. And then there is moving in together as husband and wife. And once a woman has received Kiddushin, if they decide not to go ahead with getting married, then she has to have a get. Now, if the engagement ring is given, what is engagement means also a commitment. Therefore, it's got strong resemblance to the Kiddushin ring, and if it's done in the presence of Eidim, so then it could be seen as Kiddushin, and therefore, if Chas v'Shalom, the Shidduch falls apart, then it's not enough just to do Michael one another, it would have to be with a get. And so to avoid this, the Rebbe, and he brings a whole thing from Rav Henkin, very strongly discouraged the giving of an engagement ring at the engagement. Afterwards, so what in Lubavitch, as far as I hear, comes by the Yichud room, in addition to the ring which was given under the chuppah, which is a plain gold wedding band. Also, the Chosson will then give an engagement ring with a stone, whatever, so the engagement ring. So the engagement ring is given later, not at the time of just the engagement. Then he goes further, and he writes the following: that after the Tanoim are read, but again, I'm not going to go into this now. Chabad, we don't do Tanoim at the engagement. We only do it on the day of the Chasana. But in the custom, many do still do Tanoim at the engagement. So then the Chosson gives a matana to the Kalloh, but it should be done not handing it directly, but rather putting it down nearby, or through a third party, his mother, his sister. So they're giving the gift through an indirect way. And just to clarify the balance here, on the one hand, why are you giving a gift? Because you want to create a shiur hadas, whatever the word for that is in English. You want to create a certain closeness. That's why you're giving a gift. On the other hand, you know that you're not married yet, and therefore getting too close is inappropriate halacha, and therefore you give the gift with some kind of distance built in. If that's so let's just sum up this point. Giving gifts after the engagement, yes, through a third party. Certainly, this concern of overstepping the line of getting too close would apply before the shidduch is closed when meeting, and therefore I believe that is indeed the minhag to avoid giving gifts at that stage, for the reason of respecting. At the moment we are trying to get to know one another, but we're not overstepping the line. Let's move on, and so I had this question came from a couple of directions. On Lag Boimer, a shliach did a barbecue, and one of the people who's close to him, who offered to do the barbecuing, so he unfortunately is not Shomer Shabbos in any way. And so one of the other guests at this event, by this barbecue, said, if he's not a Shomer Shabbos, is what he's doing, roasting this meat on the barbecue, is it not a problem of Bishul Akum? So here what you have on the screen is from the Pischei Tshuva at the beginning of Hilchos Bishul Akum Yodeh Kuf Yud Gimel, and he quotes from one source that the reason for Bishul Akum, why Chacham forbade us from having what was cooked by a goy, is because having their nice gishmaka cooked food will bring down barriers and bring to intermarriage. If that's the reason, if the reason for Bishul Akum, for being forbidden, is to deter intermarriage, but when it comes to Mechal Shabbos, use the word mumar. So a mumar, a person who has dropped Yiddishkeit totally and switched even to another religion. So when it comes to everything else, we say he's like a goy. When it comes to marriage, it's considered like a yid, and therefore this person, if you want to marry his daughter, etc., you would be allowed to. And therefore, there's no bishul akum by a mumar. The mumar is not considered a goy in relation to bishul akum. But then he brings another reason, and that is why should we not be eating what the goy cooked? In case the goy mixed in some non-kosher ingredients? And if so, a person who has dropped Yiddishkeit totally is also you can't trust him. Of course, you can say now in this immediate environment, I brought the meat, I brought the barbecue, I brought the whatever ingredients, therefore I don't have to worry. But all right, so there is here we have two opinions, and l'chatchila, one shouldn't rely on a Bechal Shabbos Jew to allow him to cook food for you to be kosher food. That's a l'chatchila. As I said, in the future, the shliach said you should be lighting the fire, and in this way it's considered bishul yisrael, at least for Ashkenazim. Right. If you get involved a little bit, poke the fire a bit, fine. So this I got from one angle. Then I got from another angle. A shliach says to me that a girl who was niskar for him and his wife went off to Eretz Yisrael, to Mayanot, or wherever, and Baruch Hashem, she's shomer Torah mitzvahs. She's come back home to the UK, and her parents have kindly gone kosher, but they're not shomer Shabbos in the least. So now one of her friends told her, "Do you realize that when you come home, whatever your mum cooks is going to be bishul akum because she's not shomer Shabbos, Mchal Shabbos, which means every time mum cooks, you're going to have to light the fire for her." I said to the shliach, "This is not going to work. That's that kind of relationship. That every time the mother cooks, the girl is going to have to say, 'Oh, mama, you have to light the fire before you do that.' You're asking for an explosion there. And therefore, we're going to have to rely on the more lenient opinion to say that it's only got to do with chasnos. And even the second opinion, which says got to do with Devarim Asurim, she's in the house, she sees the ingredients, she sees there's no tray for stuff in the house. We're going to have to rely on the lenient view and say it's called, that's not a problem of Bishul Akum. So, depending on the situation, bring in this Chal Shabbos chef, don't go that way, but there is room to be mekel, and in the case where you cannot be machmir, then there's room to be mekel. Let's move on. So, I don't usually talk about Aveda stuff, but on this show, but okay. What happened here? The shayla has come up many times. Someone has lost a relative, for which he therefore has to say shiva. And during a shiva, a man or woman is also to do malacha. They're not allowed to do regular work. They're not allowed to trade. And so then what happens with their business? What happens with the shop? So simply put, yes, the shop should be closed for the week due to bereavement. What happens though if it is a partnership or when it's a big investment and to stop for a week is going to cause a significant loss? So there are ways around it. So one way is to write over the whole property, the business, to write it over to someone else. It's not yours, it belongs to someone else. For the week of Shiva, it belongs to someone else. And that way the business can continue to function. And what I saw in Nitei Gavriel, he brings that in the case of partners, some allow even less than that, just that one of the partner, who is the mourner, the ovel, he just says, I'm withdrawing any interest for this week. It's not to do with me. And then the other partner takes over. In the Sefer of the Madrich, written by Reb Levi Garelik, he published there 2 pages, a Hebrew and an English document, for the transfer, where the oinen would be able to write over this business that belongs to someone else. So that is a solution that the business should be able to continue to run, and it's not his or hers for that matter, for the week of Shiva. Someone asked me, what happens with the income generated? So truthfully, I don't have an answer to that. I didn't find an answer to that. in many cases, it's not a question of a week-to-week income. It's something which, the case which I had this week was someone in Eretz Yisrael has a nursery of plants, fruit, vegetables. It's not a week-to-week thing. It goes over weeks. It has workers and to maintain the greenhouses, whatever. So you can't stop for a week because it's going to go to ruin. But it's not as if there's a profit generated per week. That's more simpler. If there were a profit generated during that week, it would make sense that you're withdrawn, then you shouldn't be keeping the profits. It should whoever you gave it to, especially if it's a partner. Okay, so you're withdrawn for that week. But I did not find this discussed in Poskim. I'm going back to one of our listeners talking about a hospital where there's no Eruv Chatzeres. Can you move from ward to ward? And the answer is yes. The hospital is all the Rishus HaYochid within the buildings for sure. I don't know about the grounds. That would have to be inspected. Are there walls around the grounds? But in the hospital, there's no private ownership there. It's even less than a hotel. A hotel, at least you're reserved to sit in a particular room. You could say, "Oh, I need to have an area because it's my room." In a hospital, your mom is at their mercy. Yeah? This room, that room, they can move you around. There's no ownership there. And so therefore, there's no private ownership. There's a management of the hotel, of the hospital, and so it's all it's a Rishus HaYochid. It's not what's called a Rishus HaMo'ireves. It's not multiple owners in the premises and therefore requiring an Eruv. It's just a single owner. Let's go back to our list. Okay, so now we have in benching and in davening very similar phrases. In the Rov of Anash, we say "Ushvoir oil hagoyim me'al tzavorenu," break the yoke of the goyim from our necks, from upon our necks. And we have a very similar lashon in benching. Oil golus me'al tzavorenu. So now, going back, well, let's go back to the previous slide. So Reb Baruch Noah, son of Reb Chaim Noah, wrote to the Rebbe about why is harachamon in benching different to the same bakosha in Bechas Krishma in Avas Olam. They should say oil hagoyim and not oil golus. The Rebbe answered, Gam dati keinhu. I agree with you that it should be oil hagoyim too. So let's come back to this is on the top right of the screen. This is from the first print of the Alter Rebbe Siddur which we have, and there it says Shvoir oil ha'akum me'al tzavorenu. So there was always the worry about the censor checking the Jewish books and Sforim, and if they see something which is offensive, so they would block the printing. So whenever there's something disparaging for Goyim, so then the printers would put the word Ho'aku. Those are serving stars and the constellations, and they would then, even any Sforim at the beginning, at the inside of the front page, wherever it says Goyim, we don't mean the Goyim today, which are civilized and friendly and refined people. It's referring to the pagans who were half cannibals, kind of thing. That was the excuse. So they put oil ha'akum me'al tzavorenu. And then at a later print, you see here, that was perhaps also not good enough. To break our yoke from upon our necks. Now, before going further, what is more offensive to the Umes Ha'olam? To say oil hagoyim or oil golus? And so I think, and it's quite obvious to say, you, the goy, are my problem. And that is a greater offensive statement, more offensive statement to say, oil golus, there is a situation, there's a world situation, we are in golus, and may that be taken off our yokes, off our necks. So Oil golus is a milder offense than oil hagoyim. And so back to our question, why in Abbas Oilom is it one way, and why in benching is it another way? And just before we wrap up, we have here also another print. This is from Tofresh Chavches, and it has here Shvoi Uleinu Me'al Tzavarenu, and a benching also has Yishboi Uleinu Me'al Tzavarenu. So you see, it's fluid. It's Uleinu, Golus, etc. And so what's very interesting that the Rebbe here, and this is around Tafshin Lamed Aleph, has responded to Baruch Noah that he also agrees that in benching we should also say oil hagoyim. However, as I noted in my siddur, the publishing house called Chosson asked the Rebbe whether they should change this in the print, and the Rebbe said no, they shouldn't change it. So again, in benching it says oil golus, and although the Rebbe agreed to say oil hagoyim in benching, but in print he wanted it to stay the way it was. So you can explain this on various levels. You can say, I just happened Behar-Bechukosai Protis, learning Gemara Kiddushin today, Chav Daled, the Chav Daled Aleph, and it says there a lotion of Mishnah Eino Zozim Im Koimo, and Rashi says once people have gotten used to saying things in a particular way, so then it's difficult to change the way you express. And therefore, possibly on a very simple level, the Rebbe is saying, since people are used to saying it this way, let them continue saying it this way, don't have to change it in the print. That's one level. Another level is that, and I've seen this elsewhere, there's a special tefillah which is added on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in Moedim. There's a whole list of things which you ask Hashem to protect us from. Now, if you take a look in the older print, it says one of those 13 things which I mentioned, I think, is Ushmad. And then, the later prints, the word Ushmad was taken out. Now, Shmad means where the Goyish authorities or whoever would forcefully convert Jewish people to become Christians. And somehow this was a sensitive point and it was dropped. No, today we don't have to worry about having that in the Machzor. And yet the Rebbe told them not to put it back. There's possibly a certain diplomacy that not to write. If things are there, it was. In Avasoila, I'm just reprinting a siddur which was printed in Vilna 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I'm just reprinting, but to prepare a new text. Oh, we are going to object to the Oil Hagoyim. Perhaps that's the diplomacy which the Rebbe was taking a line, not to put it in their face, so to speak. Okay. Now, another couple of points we have, and someone asked me. We say in before Baruch Shomar Hashem Yichud Kudshav Richu L'Yachad Hashem Yud Kei Bevov Kei, and he asks, what's this Yud Kei? There's no such word in Hebrew Kei. There's the word, there's letter Hey, but what's Yud Kei? So what are we saying this Kei for? And it's like it doesn't make sense. So happily, that's the way I was taught when I was learning to daven some 60 years ago, and it seems to be across the board that's the way it was taught. And here you have the Gemara Avodah Zarah talks about Hahoiges Hashem Ba'os Yosef, one who articulates Hashem's names with its letters. So one way would be to say a person who utters the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei that is Hoiges Hashem, which is forbidden. Tosfos says it means if you say the four letters. If you say Yud and then a Hey and then a Vav and then a Hey, that's also called Hoig Hashem Ba'os Yosef. And the Arizal writes the Chidah. Chidah lived about 200 years ago. The Arizal accepts the words of Tosfos, that we should not be uttering the four letters of Hashem's name in succession. Omnom b'koyre oisom, b'milui gamkein, that you say yud and hey, etc., is also included. And therefore, if you did have that coming up, you should say like this: yud a hey oi, etc. Yud a hey, and then a vav a hey, etc. Oisha yoima yud k. Yeah, so the this Yud K thing is already recorded by the Chidor, as I say, about 200 years ago. Now, the question remains. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. So my answer to him is to this question: when it's a brocha or a tefillah, then you need to say Hashem's name as best as you can. So you don't say Yud Kei Vav Kei, you'll say Adonai, etc. But in L'Shem Yichud, it's not a tefillah as such. It's kind of referring to a concept. We're mentioning about a concept of Yichud, Yud Kei, and Vav Kei. It's a Kabbalistic concept which we are alluding to, we're referring to. Therefore, it's okay to use it with a chinui, with an indirect pronunciation. And really, when it comes to the Hirotzen and Krishma Shalamita, about the Daled Mises, there it's clearly you have im pagamti b'shem yud kei vav kei. How else can you say it? You can't say with the hey because that's Hoy Gashem V'Os Yosef, which we're not allowed to do. So the only way you can do is yud kei vav kei with J K. So that remains minig Yisrael to say yud kei, and that's how it's published in the annotated Siddur. And as I say, this seems to be the widespread minig Yisrael. Whoever says Yud, this Shem Yichud says Yud K, as far as I know. Okay, on the list, I did put also a question number 9 is, can we have a joint Sheva Brachas? For in this our Kehillah, we have 2 chasanas, 2 weddings, and we want to make a communal Sheva Brachas. Can we have the 2 chasanim and Kallos at the 1 Sheva Brachas? Now, I'm not going to answer that question now. I didn't have time to look into it. Briefly, I did see in the Ramah that that it says you can do it, and that would mean 1 set of Sheva Brachas covering for both couples. Now, and then if you want to have separate, then I saw in one of the Svarim saying about sending the 1 Chosson out and then doing for 1, then the other Chosson comes in. What I do remember then is by the Rebbe often, now it's useful to the younger people who don't remember this, by the Rebbe was often a case where they did Sheva Brachas at the Farbrengen, at the end of the Farbrengen, and there would be several Chasanim sometimes, and would be a couple of times Sheva Brachas. So it needs a little bit more homework before saying something definitive. So I'm going to leave that. And the last thing which I had was the same fellow who challenged me about the Yud Kei Vav Kei, also referred to what I'd spoken about a couple of weeks ago, talking about small communities, or not even communities, where they don't get a minyan. And we had a couple of things about doing Kriyas Torah. So one of the things was, what about doing a Zoom Erev Shabbos session? And I said, don't call it a Friday night session, call it a pre-Shabbos session. And so this fellow says to me that this is very common now in the Reform, Conservative. They do an Erev Shabbos session, a Kabbalah Shabbos on Zoom. A Kabbalah Shabbos in the winter, it's going to be 6 o'clock, and summer it's going to be 6 o'clock. It's always, and they don't have the restrictions of the Zmanim. And therefore, he says we shouldn't be doing things which the Reform are doing. And there are things which the Rebbe did object to. When someone wanted to make a tefillah group led by a woman chazanit, etc., the Rebbe's response apparently to Rabbi Kunin was find out how the conservative movement started, and etc. So certain innovations, true, which the Reform, etc., are doing, is something which you shouldn't do. I'm not saying something here definitive. I think there's a difference where you have a community and you have a Taka Kabbalah Shabbos with a minyan, and then to separately or to put that on Zoom, whatever, however you can do that, that I think your objection is valid. But if you have a case where you don't have people coming together Friday night at all, and this way you're going to be able to communicate them with on a weekly basis, and you're going to remind them when Shabbos is, and you're going to say share with them something about Shabbos. I see that in a much more positive light than, and I see the benefits outweigh perhaps the concerns which the person raised. But I'm not there. This is a question from the United States, and it's something which should be decided, as the Rebbe would say, al Chabad al Asar lahachlit. All right, I'm going to finish with this tonight. As I said earlier, I'd like to get to Ma'ariv for 9:30. So I'm going to wish you all a good Shabbos. And as we're getting closer to Shavuos, Kabbalah Satayra B'Simcha V'Pnimis. Kol Tov.
Shkoyach.
Kol Tov.